All right. Well, thanks for coming today. Really happy to be here and share our work. Like Joe said, it's a really great collaborative project, and we've had a lot of fun with it. Who here has ever tried virtual reality before? All right. What do you think? Pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah. Busy. Yeah. Yeah. So it can definitely be a different experience. I tried my first game where I went to the top of a building and you walk the plank and jump. And it was so surreal to me that my body was reacting as if it was a true experience. So definitely a very powerful technology. And we want to talk about serious gaming applications to rehabilitation in this talk today. So like I said, this is a really great collaborative team. We have a lot of the team here today, actually, which is great. We have Marcus King, who is from Callaghan, who's really helped spearhead this project. Joe Nunnerley as well, who's been vital from the University of Chicago and Vail. And then we have our game designers. So we have Riley and Nadia from Cerebral, who is a local game design studio in Christchurch. I represent Laura Ferguson Trust, and we provide rehabilitation for people largely after traumatic brain injury. We've also had really great support from MedTech Core. They have funded our initial concept design and focus groups, which I'll be talking about today, and they've recently refunded us for a future pilot trial. So we're quite excited about that. Okay. Just because I'm a little bit pregnant, I might sit down so you hear, but if you can't hear me, just let me know. All right, so I have some videos, and it's a shame because they're not working today. But if you ever want to see what virtual reality is like, essentially you have a headset and some controllers that you can hold, and you put this headset on, and it's quite immersive. So basically, everything you see is in the virtual world. You can also put on headphones, so then you have basically a 3D immersive environment where even the sounds are localized if something's coming from behind you or in front of you, etc. All right. We really think that VR can be a great technology for rehabilitation just because it's so adaptable. In current rehabilitation, we're sort of dependent on our environment, but in virtual reality, you can really adapt your environment to meet whatever needs you want. So you can safely simulate different risky situations, which are really great to trial and rehab to build people's confidence and to try new situations. And you can also help promote self-management by building confidence in those types of situations. So we think there's a lot of potential here. All right, in this video, I was going to show you a clinical example. So in sort of the early days of virtual reality, people took sort of standard games off the shelf and would just sort of use them to try out the technologies with their clients. So this would be sort of giving people a respite from being in the hospital by having an underwater experience, for example. So using games that already exist to sort of get people out of their day-to-day monotony. This was then expanded to really first looking at motor rehabilitation, so applying really great serious gaming technology to help support rehabilitation for limb movement, for example, after stroke, and also in spinal cord injury and Parkinson's disease as well. Really great combinations with virtual reality use of treadmills to improve that sort of motor response. Also lately, people are using this more and more in dementia, which is something that we see. But when we look at VR and TBI and cognitive rehabilitation, there's not quite as much evidence. And this is because cognitive rehabilitation is quite challenging. It's a lot harder to see than motor rehabilitation. So the evidence is sort of emerging anyway for traditional rehab. And then applying VR on top of that is sort of that next element. So for the clinicians in the room, how many of you work with traumatic brain injury? We have two from Laura Ferguson, I know that. Okay, so a few of you here. Well, how many of you know somebody who's experienced a traumatic brain injury? Yeah, so unfortunately quite a few hands there, yeah. TBI is a growing problem in New Zealand. 13% of the population here in New Zealand has experienced a brain injury in their lifetime. And even more unfortunately, it's most common in sort of the wage earning and childbearing years of life. So not only does this have a profound impact on the person and their family, but it can have a huge impact on the society as a whole. So when we think about about rehabilitation for traumatic brain injury, best practice is really looking at maximizing the person's opportunity in their ordinary life. We don't want to try to maximize certain skills in a laboratory. We want people to be out doing the things that they normally do in their home and normal routine. But this can be a challenge for individuals because of the symptoms they experience after a brain injury. So challenges include fatigue, communication, balance changes, of course, changes with their thinking, their cognition, or their behavior, mental health alterations, and all of this can impact on their relationship, which can further worsen those symptoms. So it can be a real vicious cycle. And with all of this in mind, you can imagine that social isolation can be a really common consequence of having all of these symptoms interplay. And so having the ability to practice critical skills in a safe space really is essential for improving participation in normal life. And I love this quote here by this researcher, because really in TBI, we're not as worried about the physical deficits, because those typically resolve rather quickly. It's those psychosocial and social adjustment issues that are the big factors in brain injury. All right. So talking about symptoms, there, like I said, there's a whole host of symptoms after traumatic brain injury, but fatigue is one of the most common symptoms that people report. And this can affect anywhere from 21 to 73% of individuals after brain injury, so a huge proportion. And this is also one of the most troubling longer-term symptoms. 43% of people report this symptom persists even up to years after their injury. Fatigue can be both physical or cognitive. I like to think of physical fatigue as, you know, if you have a big day skiing and you're feeling tired the next day, sore muscles. But cognitive fatigue is different. So that's, I like to think of it, imagine you're jet lagged, you have a cold, and you have to show up for a meeting the next day. You're just not going to be at your best. You're not going to be thinking sharp, you're not going to be quick on your feet, and you're going to have that fog or haziness, that sort of mind slowness. Is that sort of, have you felt that before? I think we all have. Yeah. Pregnancy can give me cognitive fatigue. And the issue with cognitive fatigue and rehabilitation, though, is that it's just poorly defined. We don't have really great working definitions, which is why it's not a very well-researched area. And in clinical practice, we try our best, but we don't have very strong evidence-based guidelines to help us deal with this topic. So in terms of definitions then, sort of the best working definition for cognitive fatigue that we have is an increase in mental exhaustion as a result of prolonged periods of activity. So if somebody is, after a traumatic brain injury, you know, going through and reading, you know, a heavy book, in a very challenging book, so that period of cognitive activity will then lead to a subsequent period of mental exhaustion. So it's subjective, and it can interfere with activities, is sort of the big point. But the even trickier part is that most people with brain injuries don't have the best awareness of this fatigue, because it's different, right? We think of fatigue as something that makes you yawn. This type of fatigue is something that might make you slur your words, or have trouble finding words, or have trouble balancing. So very different symptoms than you normally expect for fatigue. And all of this can lead to increased falls, increased social isolation, and it can just further that negative cycle. So that awareness is really key, and that's really what we're trying to pinpoint with this treatment. All right, so when we think about treatments for fatigue, and this goes for other traumatic brain injury symptoms as well, treatment usually comes down to a combination of education, compensatory strategies, different type of cognitive behavioral interventions, and or mindfulness-based stress reduction type techniques. So that's sort of our toolkit that we have, but it's all reliant on a person's awareness. And so to get awareness, you need to get that person into the community, into functional environments, almost so they can see themselves fail, for example, so they can build up that awareness of why they then need that education, need those strategies, to go back and apply those things in practice. So that's where we really see an advantage for virtual reality, because we can allow an environment where someone can gain experience, hopefully therefore raising their awareness, to see the need for further rehabilitation. You can increase complexity as the individual progresses. You can modify stresses and hazards. You can really adapt the game to make it suitable for that person. So there is sort of emerging evidence for cognitive rehabilitation using VR technology. The first and foremost is shown to be safe in traumatic brain injury. With any type of technology, but especially in screen-based technology, you always have a risk of seizure. That's something that you worry about because any type of screen has that sort of flashing light that can elicit that. And with traumatic brain injury, you have sort of a different threshold for seizure activity than normal. So in studies to date, it's been safe in this population. And it's also shown to boost motivation. I think this is really easy to imagine because a lot of our clients are male, and not to stereotype, but men sometimes like video games. And so you can have a lot more motivation by having someone interact with very cool cutting edge technology compared to sitting with someone like me looking at handouts. So you just have a different level of motivation that comes with using high tech in clinical practice. There's also an important neurological correlate to this point, because if you're able to increase motivation, you theoretically can increase intensity of your rehab, which may help support neuroplasticity. And so that's sort of what some evidence is supporting as well. Neuroplasticity is, of course, your brain's ability to change and adapt. And so if you're able to support that, you might see more meaningful, lasting change. All right. But if it's so wonderful and perfect for clinic, why isn't everyone using VR every day? Well, we live in a real world and things cost money. In healthcare, we always struggle with buying technology. But I will say the cost of different tools like virtual reality is declining substantially as each year goes by. The other one is just availability of space. It's something that we always are discussing. And having the space and the technology available to use this kind of technique is something that needs to be figured out. Also, we're still having emerging evidence in the non-motor, the more cognitive domains, so that's an area to investigate. And with current cognitive rehab tools, you have the tools such as Lumosity and the different sort of brain games that are out there. There's concerns about whether it generalizes to more complex environments. Sure, you might get better at doing that cognitive technology-based task in that task, but it might not spread to other parts of your life. And so that's a big area that's important to investigate as well. And clinician confidence. How many clinicians would be keen to pick up a VR tool they've never used and go try it out with some patients who are really, coming in for help in that moment? So, I've been there myself, and I know a lot of clinicians who are sort of tech phobic. And so I think it's a big one to think about. A lot of these, especially clinician confidence, really comes from research currently not having a lot of end user involvement in the design process. So when we don't have people who have lived experience with having a brain injury or our clinicians, we don't incorporate them into the design process. Of course, we're not going to have as much clinical buy-in at the endpoint because they won't know what's been happening and it won't be as meaningful. So really that user involvement in the design and emerging technology development is a critical aspect. And that's what we'll talk about more today. I don't know if anyone's seen this before. This was presented by Fiona Jones at the conference in Wellington earlier, but I think it's a really nice sort of ladder looking at the level of involvement you can have with people, both in clinic and in research design. So when you're thinking about our clinical practice, a lot of what's done is sort of in this bottom tier, where we're doing things to people. Of course, hopefully we're not coercing anybody, but we're educating and informing. We're sort of providing information to, not with. And so when we were planning this project, we really wanted to try to hit the top of this ladder, where in our co-design, we not only got information from those with lived experience, but we acted on that information. And I think that's a really important point for this project. So really the aim of this study was to develop and test a user-designed virtual reality solution for traumatic brain injury. We did this in a translational manner where we had multiple steps that incorporated different feedback. And we found perspectives of people with brain injury and clinicians to guide all the stages of development of this tool, which is a really unique aspect of this project. It's a bit of an old picture. I don't think anybody in this group was in the focus group except one. All right, so here's a bit of a project outline. So we have 3 primary phases of this project. We are completed with phase 1, which is what I'll talk about a little bit more today. And this was the development part. And it was one of my first times co-developing a technology, and I found it really amazing process. I really enjoyed it. We held focus groups with end users, so the people who have lived experience of brain injury and the clinicians. To further refine the VR intervention. And then we have the second phase where we're going to take this tool and test it in a clinical pilot. Right. And then phase 3 will be focus groups to feedback on the trial. So basically we wanted to create something together, test it with people in the real world, and then get their thoughts, essentially. So in that first phase, in the development phase, we had 3 steps. So we had focus groups, and then we collaborated. We had a think tank with engineers, researchers, and designers who really helped influence the design based on this feedback. And then we had focus groups to trial to say, hey, this thing we designed, does it match what you wanted? Does it fit your criteria? So we really brought it back to the people who helped us design it in the first place. In terms of the individuals who helped with this study, we had 5 individuals with lived experience of brain injury. These were all individuals who were no longer in rehabilitation. So they were all working either part or full time. And you can see their injuries were quite some time ago for some, 12 years ago, with a range of 14 years on either side. They were all moderate to severe brain injuries. So that usually scored by a certain Glasgow Coma scale, which is a measure of severity and a duration of post-traumatic amnesia. Their age was around 38 years, but we had a big range, again, around 14-year range. And like most TBI studies, we had a larger majority of male participants, but we did have 1 female, and they're giving her thoughts. We had 5 clinicians also support this study. They were all experienced in all aspects of traumatic brain injury rehabilitation. We had 2 occupational therapists, a speech therapist, physio, and a clinical psychologist. So good representation from all members of the interdisciplinary team. And then we just really got to it. So we had 3 focus groups. We had 1 focus group that was with the clinicians and 2 smaller groups with the individuals with a history of traumatic brain injury. And we trialed standard games and possible applications to virtual reality. I have links here to show you guys the games, but they're not working, I'm sorry. So if you have time, Google Earth, and you can see what this virtual reality game is like. But basically, it's like you're flying anywhere in the world. So you put the headset on, and you can type in any place you want to go, and you travel to that place. You can even walk around on the streets as if you were in Paris or New York or anywhere, and you can just experience being in that part of the world. The other one we tried was called the Blue, an underwater experience. This one's very peaceful. You're underwater until a very big whale comes right next to you, and you experience what it's like to have an animal that size next to you. And then we also had a golf game for those maybe less of interest. And so that's, again, just experiencing golf in the virtual world. The people who weren't wearing the headset at the time were watching what the others were doing on the screen so they could have more experiences. And so we let everyone have a try, and then we discussed. We asked a lot of open-ended questions just to let the individuals participating guide the conversation. But some of the prompts that we used were, first and foremost, what did they think of virtual reality? What was it like for them? We weren't sure how this would go, especially in the moderate to severe brain injury group, because that hasn't really been discussed too much in the literature. Typically, those recruited in studies are more on the mild end of the spectrum, and so we really wanted to see what individuals with a history of quite significant injuries had to say about this technology. We also wanted thoughts about how it could be used in rehabilitation. We wanted to know their lived experience with brain injury, as well as working with people with brain injury, and common symptoms that they experienced or noted in others, and requirements of the tool for these symptoms. So whatever those key symptoms in mind were, what requirements would they want to see in a tool like this? So thinking about their responses, first, the virtual reality was really well tolerated by the group. Nobody had any major problems. Nobody couldn't handle wearing the device. The hardest was watching other people play on the screen. And I think it's just because when you don't have control of your movements, you can get quite busy watching other people move around in a way you don't expect. But there was widespread enthusiasm about this technology. But there was concern, fair enough, about the ability of individuals to use it. I think it's represented well in this quote. It has to be something I would do when I've got a bit of energy. But when I've got that fatigue crashing on me, the last thing I want to do is put on a headset and fiddle with buttons. And I think brain injury or no, we can all appreciate that comment. So they were interested, but they needed to know the nuts and bolts to make it effective. In terms of their desire for the purpose of this type of tool, they really said they wanted a everyday environment, focusing on everyday tasks. So we had the option of, would you like something more game-based or, fighting with aliens or, any type of task that we could imagine. And really, it always came back to everyday tasks will be the most beneficial. This will help, theoretically translate games into real-world activities. Because if you're practicing cooking or practicing being in an airport, one day you may go to an airport and you'll have that experience based behind you. So that has sort of good understanding for why we think it might be effective. And it also may make VR more acceptable to clinicians and those in rehabilitation. If you can quite clearly see the purpose, you'll be more motivated to give it a try. Their suggestions for locations included a supermarket, airport, cafe, and restaurant. Basically, places we go a lot and places that are sometimes difficult to navigate, as well as quite overwhelming and noisy at times, especially if you catch it at a busy time. One individual said, just practical tasks, practical situations, something that would reinforce ways for me to manage, especially when I'm out and about, trying to be out and about, trying to be normal. I think that's a good quote reflecting what people want. Both groups really expressed that identifying cognitive fatigue could help make treatment and acceptance easier. When we asked about whether or not they experienced cognitive fatigue, it was a very clear answer that yes, this is something that even though they're still, years after their injury, they're working now, not in rehabilitation, that fatigue is still a big issue. One individual said, it would just hit me. I would just crash. I've got it. I would feel like I'm just going to die. It was just so powerful. It was like someone who cut my cord and boom, I'm gone. And another said it almost felt like there was a fog covering coming down over your brain, just like harder and sluggish. So different sort of interpretations of fatigue. People thought that complexity could be increased by having a busier environment. So noise, chaos, and social situations are what makes sort of real life tasks challenging. So noise would really test me, people asking questions, on one side someone nagging you, on the other side asking questions, all while you're trying to do something. And we know that feeling. If you're on the phone, someone's asking you a question, an email comes in, it's those kind of moments that are the most complex to deal with. Just that cognitive overload. And another person said, I don't know how you'd simulate it, but kind of like social interactions in general, where there's lots of people, because quite obviously that was probably quite tiring. All right, and then we also got feedback on what tasks they would do, what levels, how would we go up a level, how would that be organize what outcome measures we would use and how we would implement this in clinical practice. So both groups said that they really want this in a therapy session. So the option of home programs were discussed, and just with the setup and sort of the complexity of the new technology to them, they thought they would like that structure of having a therapy session. And the clinicians as well also wanted to observe and be a part of that therapeutic moment. So having that in a therapy session would be able to provide more lasting input. A scoring or monitoring component was definitely needed, so you get some sort of outcome at the end of the session. And training in VR setup, use, and troubleshooting was needed. So if a clinician was on their own using this technology, they'd want some sort of education or backup on what do I do when the screen doesn't turn on or something. So you have a bit of a backup there. Some clinician quotes here. I think our clients really struggle to see their progress. So I think something like this would be really motivating. And this was mirrored by an individual with a history of brain injury. It's always good to have feedback because you can always improve with feedback. And that's a nice one. So what we did next is really we took all of this lovely information and we collaborated to develop a tool. So we decided to model a real-world cafe. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Chris Cafe in Ireland, but it's now virtual world as well. Yeah, so our game designers actually went into Chris, and they were really, the Chris people were really happy about the idea. So it's a great cafe to choose because we are situated, we have a post-acute intensive rehabilitation unit right next to Jelly Park, and Chris Cafe is actually a very commonly used location for some of our rehabilitation outings. So if someone's in the rehab unit and wanting to practice going out and experiencing real life again, Chris Cafe is oftentimes one of the first places we go. So this makes for a good ability to compare sort of that type of training versus virtual version of that type of training. The focus of this tool is to highlight awareness of any limitations that might arise due to increasing cognitive fatigue or cognitive challenge. Now, these sort of limitations can be a range of symptoms, and we'll discuss all the different outcome measures on the next slide. But really, we want people to increase their awareness of changes in their performance as a result of increasing complexity of the situation they're in. So as the cafe gets busier, louder, more chaotic, how does that affect their performance? And how can they take that feedback to apply it into their life? We increase the distraction across each level. And again, I'll talk about this in a couple of slides, but we have visual distractions, auditory distractions, and also a difficulty level, which is the number of people at the cafe with you at any given time. Does that sort of make sense? Well, any questions so far? Okay. So we really wanted to look at different outcome measures so we can track different aspects of performance, because as we were talking about, people's symptoms of fatigue, for example, are highly variable and can be different from person to person. So we have some different domains. Short-term memory is to remember the order for other people at the table. So just like you would be at a cafe, oh, hey, can you get me a flat white? You have to hang on to that information until you get up to the counter to order it. So as the levels increase from 1 to 7, you have to remember the order for one other person all the way up to 7 other people. And these will be lunch orders, coffee orders, whatever they may be. I was trying to think if I could remember 7 people's orders. So it's a good challenge. Then we have long-term memory, which is asking someone for a belonging that was taken at the beginning of the session. So someone says, oh, I can hang on to your purse or your keys or whatever the item may be. And you have to remember, oh, hey, can I have my purse back at the end of the session? A visual spatial task, just scanning the menu for different icons, like vegetarian icon, just to look at all the different visual quadrants. Attention and information processing. So this is a really good one that I'm interested in as a speech therapist. But when people are having a conversation, then there's a distraction. Someone's needing to ask a question, oh, what did you order again? Or something. That person then has to go back and find out what topic they were talking about a moment before. So a really natural thing that happens in our everyday life. Problem solving, paying the bill, again, something that we do all the time. And then metacognition is just having that sort of reflective feedback. So that prediction before they start the game, how do you think you're going to do? And then at the end of the game, comparing how did you really do? How do you feel now? And then you can compare that to your prediction score. So if you predicted that you wouldn't be fatigued at all on this level 7 difficulty, and you thought you would be A+, no problems, but actually at the end you realized that was quite challenging for me and I feel very fatigued right now. That is that important feedback that may slowly help shift people's awareness of that was much more challenging and I didn't predict that. And so that's something that you can really take as sort of therapeutic gold to work with. Like I was saying before, our levels progress from 1 to 7. And I just have some examples here of how they progress. So visually, when you're looking around a cafe space, we get distracted by all sorts of things. So at the easiest level, there'll just be one other person at the cafe, someone far off at another table not moving much. Like you went to a cafe at a really quiet time of day, not very busy. But level 7 would be like you're going to the kids, some kids program during school holidays or something. It's going to be jam-packed. So you're going to have guests at all tables close to the player, people walking by back and forth to the counter. You're going to have animated gestures from people in the background drawing your attention, and different visual distractions. So someone tripping and spilling food, or people lining up in a queue. So you have lots of sort of visual distractions going on in the background while you're trying to do these set tasks, remembering orders, paying the bill, all of that sort of thing. In terms of auditory distractions, that's another big one. So auditory distractions can be quite common. So in the easiest level, you can have just the typical quiet cafe music, maybe the occasional coffee machine sound, all the way to level 7, loud cafe music, regular chit chat, bursts of louder noises like sudden bursts of laughter. Not just a mobile phone ringing, but like a really annoying one. You know, those ones that just never turn off. You can have regular cafe noises, a baby crying, a dog barking, a repeated door chime opening and closing, or sirens going on outdoors. So you can see how all of this chaos, this sort of simulated chaos, can increase the difficulty on those set tasks. So the memory tasks, all of those tasks stay stable across the levels, but this distraction really ups the ante and ups the difficulty while you're trying to complete those tasks. Does that sort of make sense? Now I have some pictures of what our cafe looks like. We have a bit of empty shelf situation, but we're working on it. But you can see it's very close to the Chris Cafe. And these are sort of earlier models where we won't have quadruplets in the future. But you can see it's a very naturalistic setting of a cafe. So you walk in, you can feel immediately you're in a cafe without having to be told. You select what table you want to sit at, and straight away you're immersed into that environment. Especially being sort of a local New Zealand cafe, it has all the familiar landmarks that people would expect. The counter is here, the cabinet is there, and so it's all very predictable. This is an example of a communication interaction. So the different avatars will have different things they'll say to you throughout the game. And then originally people then select what their answer would be. Okay, so for example, they'd say, hey, what were we talking about a minute ago? And then it might have different topics, rugby, weather, blah, 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 blah. This thing you see here, this floating hand, is the player themselves. And so that just gives you a reference of how to select the item on the screen. In terms of ordering for others at the table, this is just a quick look of what that looks like. Individuals will tell you their order, and then you have to remember them all and sort of plug them in on the menu. So I'll take one of these, one of those, one of these. And then this is an example of self-rating of fatigue. So an individual at the beginning will rate how fatigued are you right now and how challenging do you think this will be. And so then at the end of the game, they'll go back and do the same rating, and then they can compare. So it gives you that feedback that's really helpful. So that's what we created, and we wanted to see what people thought. So we brought it right on back to our focus group to collect information about their initial thoughts. So we had the same setup as before. Individuals tested in groups. So we had our two smaller focus groups with people with lived experience of brain injury, and then our clinician focus group. They all had a turn having to play and watched each other on the big screen while they were playing. Quite simply, this quote from an individual with history of brain injury said, "You put us in the exact right environment. This is exactly what happens when we're out." And that sort of thing is really what we were hoping for, and I think why it was so important that we picked a functional day-to-day environment instead of a game-type design. But we did get really helpful constructive feedback for future development of the game. And these were sort of classified into three primary themes. One was the naturalness. So how easy or difficult was it to use the VR system? The communication interactions, you saw from that checklist, it was a bit canned. You know, you had the 4 options that you chose from, so it wasn't completely realistic. And then troubleshooting clinical implementation. That's something that we really wanted to discuss, because if we're developing this game for clinical rehabilitation, we want to make sure that we really take a proactive step towards implementing it clinically. So in terms of naturalness and ease of use, those without gaming experience or with more serious impairments found it difficult to play certain aspects of this tool. A challenging one was teleportation, which I'll explain in a minute, but using the trigger button as well. It was just a new process for some individuals to use this technology. We had one individual who participated who had a history of brain injury, and he's a young man who is an avid gamer. And he said this would be rough for someone using VR for the first time. And I think that comes down to the teleportation. So I have the schematic here, and you can see this little person playing virtual reality. You have to sort of stand within this blue box in order for the sensors to track where you and your arms are in space while you're playing virtual reality. So if you remember that Google Earth game I was talking about where you can walk all over Paris, you can't really, because you're going to walk out the room and somewhere else and you won't be in the system. So you have to stay within your little square, few meters by few meters box to keep playing the game. So that's why they have something called teleportation. So this is your controller that you hold in your hand, and essentially you point to a distance far away, you click when you want to go there, and you kind of teleport to fly to that destination. So that's how you travel long distances in virtual reality, because you can't physically walk those distances plugged into everything. And so we spent a lot of time trying to teleport individuals when we did not have to. And so that was a really easy fix for us to then have people just instantly sit in the cafe chair and start interacting with their environment. So that was good learning from this. Also, something we wanted to further develop was the communication interaction. So as we saw, players chose one of 4 pre-written responses. An individual said that this didn't really reflect reality and didn't challenge their abilities, because one of the most fatiguing aspects of community engagement is thinking of what to say, thinking of the right thing to say. If it's not an appropriate thing to say, kind of getting yourself out of that. So all of those complex social skills can be very draining for someone after a brain injury. Someone says, conversation wears me out, and I didn't have to say anything in the game. My fatigue is only reflective of my output. So individuals wanted more open-ended questions with more natural interactions. So we decided to take that feedback and run with it. So individuals were still given a question, but because we have a clinician-led therapeutic environment, it won't be a home program, they'll be with the clinician. They can just talk their answers out loud, and the clinician can then go in and say appropriate or inappropriate, for example. So then we can still get feedback on the accuracy of their response, but the individual can think of what they want to say in quite a naturalistic way. So that's sort of a thought we had for sort of next steps to make that communication more realistic and also more challenging. Clinicians also wanted training, which I would as well, for a new device. So specifically, they wanted to understand what contraindications were there using technology in traumatic brain injury. How soon after an injury could someone use virtual reality, especially with that sort of seizure aspect of it. Ability to track outcome scores after gameplay was key. So they wanted to be able to document progress and look at change. Also, they thought a 1-hour training session would be helpful before using virtual reality. So this would be one-off, and all the clinicians who would be using the virtual reality would come to a training session just to have access to a written instruction for setup, use, and troubleshooting of the system itself. And then just guidance on recommended dose and intensity. But there was positivity from the clinician group as well. Interesting concept, a creative way of working that has potential and could be used as graded exposure type of activity, building up to the real thing. People who get overwhelmed with overstimulating social environments would benefit. So some good feedback there. So in terms of next steps, we're really looking forward to in a couple weeks, we're having a Maori-specific focus group with individuals with traumatic brain injury and clinicians. This is supported by a really amazing team set up there, as well as clinicians from Te Wakatapu, which is a local organization. So we can look at cultural aspects of this game to make sure we're meeting those needs as well. And we're going to start a pilot study in the clinical group. So we're nearly there with ethics and all of that fun stuff. And really we want to try this in clinical practice, really take it to that next level of application, and then have focus groups again after that to see what are the next steps, what are the thoughts and feedback and areas for improvement. But we really think there's huge possibility for implementation of this type of technology. I mean, this is at one cafe setting, but you could apply this to so many different activities of daily living, where people really need that essential practice in a safe scenario. Thinking about driving, cooking, grocery shopping, all of that sort of thing. Therapeutic modes for this game would be also very helpful. Just imagining a cafe, if you're in the loudest part of the cafe, but there's a quiet table around the corner, using that as a therapeutic opportunity to say, what could you do in this situation to help people practice those strategies in that virtual scenario. And using this to support early intervention in people unable to access the community. So we know there's a huge rate of brain injury in the corrections population, and these are individuals who can't access the community. So one day they will though, and they'll have difficulties. So we need to find rehab solutions to work with that population and individuals in intensive rehabilitation who aren't physically ready to access the community, but want to start practicing those key cognitive skills.